Hello, everyone. Today I'm talking to a returning champion, Minter Dial, and his book, Heartificial Empathy. And we'll talk about empathy and AI and business and what areas of the business are affected by that. He's always very, very smart. I love talking to him, and I hope you enjoy it too.
Before the interview, a quick word from our very first sponsor, Zencaster. We use Zencaster for all our audio and video recording, and it's a very nifty tool that splits up all the channels for very easy editing. Zencaster is used by 10% of all active podcasts. You can get 40% off the first 3 months and unlimited audio and video recordings with our special coupon code Wicked Podcast. I repeat, Wicked Podcast for 40% off. And now the interview.
Hello, everyone. Today I'm here with Minter Dial again, a returning champion to our podcast and his book, Heartificial Empathy. Hello, Minter, and nice to see you again. It's been a while.
It has, Marcus. So many thanks for bringing me on. Always great pleasure to chat with you.
Lovely. And you keep writing books. I wish I could. I'm only on my second. You're on your fourth or something now, third, fourth, something.
This is theoretically, in my opinion, fifth book.
Oh,
I've got my sixth
fair enough.
in the pipe, and I've already got my seventh cover. The book for my seventh book will be coming out the end of next year.
Oh,
I am still in heavy production mode. Got to sell some now.
yeah. I mean, how are you at the moment doing like one a year or something like that? Is there something to describe to nearly like a
more
book
like
club of
every
sorts?
18 months,
Oh, wow.
especially since some of them with the publisher will take inevitably 18 months from beginning to end.
Yeah.
When I self-publish, I can go quicker, but depends if I get publisher, not for the one coming up, but the one after that. We'll see.
Mm-hmm. So this one's called Heartificial Empathy. Tell us a little bit, or tell the audience who don't know you yet, who you are, what you do, and then a little bit about the book, please.
Sure. So I am an American, although confused American, born in Belgium, raised in France, educated in England, changed countries 15 times, and married to a French Spaniard. So the story is, I suppose I'm an American. I like to think of myself as a shit stirrer, someone who likes to create some shit, but more in an elegant way. My sort of purpose I've always talked about is a person who wants to elegantly elevate the debate and connect dots, people and ideas in a meaningful way. And that's informed all the work I did since I left the corporate world in 2009. I'd been an executive at L'Oreal for 16 years. And since then, I did a documentary film of the Second World War. And I've published 5 books now. And this last one, I'm a little cheating, but a little not, because it's actually a second edition.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the first edition was about 50% shorter. This is not only longer, it's also heavily redacted, changed, updated from the first one, which came out in 2018. And the 3 things that really happened, conspired in between them to make the changes. One is the massive step change in the way AI is. 2, the pandemic and how it changed the way we work and what the requests and needs are of employees and employers. And 3, the tremendous rise in mental health issues subsequent in part to the pandemic and the economic challenges, but also I think to some societal ills, and the idea of how we could be more empathic and how AI could be an empathic solution to help with mental health conditions.
Mm-hmm. So let's go back to that then and drill a little bit into that. So my background as a service designer, empathy is always the thing. We're selling ourselves through empathy, understanding the customer, the colleague, people involved in a problem and a solution, and understand them better. But then there's also the empathetic aspect of just how we deal with each other at work and produce things. So it's not just about the solution itself and the end user of a solution, but also about how we generally go about things. What part of empathy do you like to talk about in the book then, therefore, please?
Well, first of all, I tend to start with the description or definition of empathy, because a lot of people get a little confused. And empathy is about understanding what another person is thinking, feeling, or experiencing. So it's about getting into their context, not just their shoes, but their feelings and maybe how they've got to this position. That's what empathy is. But there's two important parts to empathy in terms of the way it plays out in reality. One is the person who's trying to be empathic, and the other person who's receiving the empathy. And these are two important considerations. And when we look at bringing empathy into a business, because sometimes you can try to be empathic, but it's completely transparent to the other person who's on the receiving end. Other times you don't even want to have them regarded as empathy. It's just an output of the way you are, what you're saying, what you're producing in terms of a service. And on the other hand, you might have been very empathic, but the receiver might not at all perceived it as such. And this is the tango with regard to empathy and bringing it into organizations. It's sometimes easier than others to be empathic, and the trick is finding a way to do it in a coherent and true way when you are in business, so it doesn't get sprayed out like some empathy washing.
Yeah. Do you have any sort of place where you would compare it, or can you compare it to trust building? I've just been reading a book about negotiation. There's a little about trust building there, which also builds into empathy, but seems to be part. So it's sort of same but different. Do you see sort of similarities and differences there if I talk about trust in particular? Because that seems often to be a value as well to build up between people to be successful.
Yeah, trust is something you build over time. Empathy is something you can do immediately. And generally speaking, when you talk about a negotiator, empathy is a core skill to use when you are trying to negotiate with the other person. It depends on the type of negotiation, but it's a tremendous skill to use. Trust is the consequence of having, I would say, exhibited good empathy and allowing the other person to believe or truly believe that you are thinking and understanding what they're feeling and thinking. So, yeah, they are linked in ways, but maybe I like to consider empathy more as the skill and trust as the output.
Hmm. Interesting. So if it's a skill, and my next question is, can everyone learn empathy? And I think it's one of your chapters as well. And I, just as a caveat, throwing it in there, I know service designers who sell empathy, but themselves don't seem to be very empathetic often when they go about things. Sometimes, which is sometimes a bit of a paradox. So tell us a bit about, can we all learn empathy, and how might we go about that? If
Right. Well, first of all, I think that there's a sort of a natural component of empathy that you have once you've aged a little bit, you've moved away from the me world and understand that you are part of a different community, and then you start developing an understanding of others. But we're not all programmed in the same way, and it's certainly as you develop over time, one marker and something that significantly changes how people are empathic is whether you're a woman or a man. And that's not me speaking anecdotally. There are lots of studies that show that women index 10 percentage points higher than men for their empathy. So there's a nuance in this. Some people say, can you teach empathy? And I tend to say no. It's more to be provocative. The fact is that if someone's not willing to learn, then there's no teaching that'll ever get there. It's like trying to teach somebody to have a good attitude. If they don't wish to do it, then they're never going to
yeah,
get it. And empathy is a soft skill, and it's something that is, or some people like to call it a hard skill, but it's a soft skill. And it's something that you can practice at times and not be good at others, not need to have it at other times. And so it's a very messy skill to have. And as far as designers are concerned who are non empathic, I know many managers who are not empathic. I know many designers who are not empathic. It's very easy not to be empathic, and there is actually more difficult to be empathic in business because there are two things that tend to be the enemy of empathy. The first is stress. And if you're being stressed and the performances are in,
yeah.
you kind of move back into your or your reptilian brain, and you don't have the space for others. It's more about fight or flight and survival
Hmm.
skills. And the second thing is time, because time is the most limited resource we have. And the willingness to spend time and be present in such a way that you are fully listening to somebody else, this requires an ability to be present and then spend the time to listen and observe the other person. And this type of space and time, it sounds very Einsteinian, is difficult for people to craft, especially when you're living in a stressful work environment.
Yeah. And I think, so I was just talking to a friend of mine, and on the weekend I came across, and I think I've come across it before. There's this video from John Cleese, who I wasn't aware he was a co-founder of a management consultancy, I think around creativity and things like that, apart from all the other things he's been doing. And it's I think it's currently popping up on Instagram or maybe just on mine, and I've seen it before. And he gave this amazing speech where he said the difference between creative people and non-creative people is that non-creative people are a little bit more comfortable to be in this non-discomfort zone before from someone telling you a problem and you having to come up with a solution. The more you're uncomfortable about it, the quicker you go, oh, okay, I need to bring a solution because this is not comfortable. I need to bring this out. Whereas seemingly creative people are spending more time to investigate, be curious, play around with it a bit before they feel the need to actually finally bring some solution forward. And that seems to play a little bit into what you just described about pressure, and that, empathy is curiosity, right? If you're not curious about someone else and who they are and how they feel, you're not going to get to that empathic level, right? So
Can I
saying
just
that,
butt in?
yeah,
Just
please.
butt in. One is that there's curiosity, and then there's humility as well. And
Mm,
I would argue that creative people tend to be more curious
yeah,
than the non-creatives, who tend to be in sort of problem solution mode, operational execution mode. And this idea of listening and being curious and humble is something that's quite foreign to many people in management.
yeah. And that's a really good point, the humility point as well, because right now, new project, the main blocker I'm getting to tell people or sell the idea to, like, why don't we just listen a bit more, figure out the needs, understand this better before we take a step. And the main argument is actually not the humility aspect, which said, oh no, we already know this, or I know this already. It's actually, oh, we don't have time for that. I feel that holds me back or it holds me up. So it's the time pressure aspect that seems to be more prevalent. And it's also nicer to know, because I don't want to live in a world where everyone actually is not, doesn't have the humility aspect going and thinks they all know better. I think there's, at least in my experience, I believe it's that, and it's been more positive view that people are just pressured for time, and therefore, as humble as they are, they can't quite do it. So, and in that context, so do you think, and you said earlier, the last couple of years made you look at the book again and concise it and put different things in, or clarify certain things. How would you say then the last few years, and let's take AI out of the equation for a bit, and then after go back to it, how do you think the last few years have actually shaped this to the better or worse in terms of the conversations or experiences you've seen on that level? The pressure, you know, the
Well,
new
I,
kind of, yeah.
I think we had an up and a down, and
Mm,
basically the concept of empathy has become almost mainstream. There were in the last 5 years more than 300 books with the word empathy in the title that have been newly
mm,
published. So clearly, this is now a bigger topic, and particularly during the pandemic and the lockdowns, the notions of empathy became more and more apparently necessary. That people were suffering, that
mm,
people were having to work in different types of conditions from their home in a room with three other flatmates and such, which meant that you brought your personal life into the workspace, and that type of environment, more intimate, required, at least seemingly, a lot of managers to be more empathic. The downside is that post pandemic, I don't want to say we've gone back to a new normal. However, what's happened is that economically we're under stress, inflation is pressured. There's a lot of things that are still creating angst, whether it's political division, wars on our borders, and with the tremendous pressures, people have gone back to needing pushing through and their work. And one of the specific things that's been a particular challenge is this notion of remote work. When it was an injunction that the government said you have to work at home, businesses somehow surprisingly all were able to, having pushed back and refused it for many years. The point is that it was an obligation. Now we're sort of in the mode of it's a choice. And some people want to do it at home. Some people want to have the social life at work. And meanwhile, you have to deal with a customer and making the business run. So this choice factor is more complicated because now you want to impose one way or the other. You want it to be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at home or not, 9 to 5 or not. What sort of flexibility do you want to provide? How do you want to manage that flexibility? And the outgrowth of that has been, and I have statistics to prove it, that the HR department, the human resources department, is absolutely being squeezed. They're being pushed with unempathic orders from above to do things, push people, recruit new people, retain new talent. So they are supposed to be having an empathic way towards the employees and are being pushed in a non-empathic way by the senior staff. And it was reported in a study by Business Solver that somewhere around 70%, nearly or 2/3 of human resource employees have declared having a state of anxiety or depression in the last 12 months.
Wow.
And a direct consequence of this. And I think that within that, you will find that this empathy notion has gone and been considered a nice to have, but not obligatory any longer.
So when you have that, and we now talked about, you just included HR in that. We know it from the customer side, the colleague side, of course, the way we work in teams, even on the level of the leadership, to be empathetic towards all the employees and going through hard times and understanding and being there and at least communicating in the right way, if not acting in the right way. It seems to be everywhere. We're now in a scenario, and at least my last 3 to 5 projects I was in, it's all about cost cutting, right? And cost cutting means cutting people, cutting tools, cutting into literally essential aspects. I've seen companies who are cutting into their cyber security departments, which is often the least thing they want to do, and they went there. Under those economic pressures, how do you think we find our way back into, let's say, a better world where empathy as a part, or the equivalent of whatever that means in a business sense, is brought back onto the table and say, look, we're literally going to invest X amount in that, and that represents itself in, putting more people into our HR department, improving the process within which we hire talent and create a workspace that actually people are not getting depressed in or have anxiety attacks in. How do we get there now that it seems in a lot of companies there's more pressure on money alone more than anything? And to give you maybe a further example into that, to see what you make of it. If I look at innovation, right? Innovation for me, in all the projects ever been, money was never the issue. You could invest in it, of course, you want to maintain it to some level, but to actually make it work, I found often money was not the key aspect to it. But you had to sort of signal enough to put this out there and maintain certain things. Is that something you can do towards the empathy thing, or how would you go about to bring this back on board? Or do we have to wait till times get better?
No, that'd be a bad idea because when times get better, you may not exist. There is definitely a lot of challenge out there, and how do we fix it? Well, my general gestalt would be to start thinking about what is the purpose of your business. Do you have a purpose? Does it resonate? Does it sound true? Is it somewhat realistic? And are you living it? Are you at least feeling it, living it, some portion of every day? And when you have that, then it becomes a little bit nicer to slot in the idea of being more empathic. And here's the thing which I say is try to be more empathic. What does that mean? Well, that means you need to know how empathic you are in the first place. Because if you're not empathic at all as an organization, and all of a sudden you get this coach that comes and says, oh, you guys need to be empathic, yada, yada, yada. what you ought to be thinking about is how empathy can help you to achieve your strategic ambitions. And if that's sorted underneath a bigger purpose, then you start being a little bit more realistic about how you bring empathy into the process. And one of the things that a lot of companies have failed to consider is that you can't just be empathic with your customers. You need to start from the inside out. And it seems like the winning idea to make great design through empathy for your customers. It seems great to have fantastically empathic customer service operators who are dealing with customers that are angry and using empathy there. There are many ways, you could use empathy to increase or improve your marketing taglines. But if within the organization you are not being empathic, this will certainly not pan out as you wish. So the first thing is have purpose. Second of all, think about being better at empathy. And if you can, articulate it around your strategy. And the third thing, which relates, I think, to a lot of our malaise, which we have and the mental health conditions we in the world, is that a lot of people are misplacing or misrepresenting themselves as individuals. And so you make things important. You seem like that my title, my car, my job is important, and or the causes that we are going after. And we end up putting up some sort of mirage of ourselves. And in this mirage, we end up being very disappointed with ourselves, which is why we have so many more people who are declaring having suicidal thoughts or taking their lives by suicide. We have many more people who are declaring anxiety, not because there's so much anxiousness out there. And when you're in this position of anxiety and depression, it's not a good place to be in order to exercise empathy. You should start with yourself, get yourself better. And one of the ways I think people need to do is start thinking better about understanding who they are, both their imperfections, the bad sides, and the good sides, not just this ideal image of me, which is this misrepresentation, which we are unfortunately doing in and out of businesses. Like, you think about how businesses try to massage the message. How are we going to, run the story? How are we going to, feed it, spin it to the media, as opposed to telling the truth? And a lot of companies don't know how to do that. They get stuck in some bureaucratic mass thinking, which runs everything down. No one has the courage to say what's really happening.
Yeah. So I think that sounds nice. And
Not sure.
it does. And I think it's obviously, it's something a lot of people could agree with. And the question is exactly that. You look at companies, especially bigger ones, they have a hierarchy and all of that stuff where you go, okay, that means I need to start fighting or find a safe place by myself. Let's say the team is the first context of issue. Beyond that, there's a manager on top, and then there's his manager on top, and so on and so on. And you get all these different types of styles of companies. Some are more on that, some are a bit more relaxed, but still pressures will come from somewhere. Is it then, I mean, is it better to bring out the message maybe therefore out to, yes, the individuals, and build it up from there and say, look, we just have to individually do that. And if you're lucky, other people in the company will do it too, not because you're doing it, but they're just generally doing it. And you have to get lucky, and then you get more people around you who generally actually start to be nice. Or maybe you started, and that makes other people a bit like starting a movement, right? If you have that energy left in you. And I know a lot of people are very depleted at this point. It's just unfortunately sort of some aspect of reality. Or is it more valuable, you reckon, to, for leadership to say, despite all of this stuff, I will not just signal it, I will authentically drive it, and maybe risk to some level my position that I've worked a long time for. What do you see sort of is most effective in that sense? Or is it just a general where you say, no, look, it's a general message, and we'll have to try our best, and that's sort of it? Or, is there anything where you say, like, I don't know, sorry.
I definitely don't
Come
think
on.
it's a general idea. You need to be a little bit more specific and intentional about it.
Mm.
You talked about this risk, and it's interesting because
Yeah.
in the Business Solver study, 77% of CEOs declared that they feared losing respect if they were more empathic.
Yeah.
And this is obviously part misunderstanding of what empathy is, because empathy isn't just about being nice or compassion. It's a
Yeah.
state of or willingness to understand what others are thinking, feeling, and experiencing. And as far as making it happen, if you're an individual, of course it depends on your context, but you are an individual middle management within
Mm-hmm.
the entire organization. Basically, it's unlikely that you are going to be able to spark a revolution of empathy. The way empathy works is that it doesn't bring an immediate return on investment. It's something that builds over
Mm.
time. And so you won't be able to do a business case and say, well, in 3 months, I'm just going to be empathic and watch my numbers explode, and then
Yeah.
get shown up on stage, get an award, and say, well, how did you do this, Mr. Kirsch? Well, I was Mr. Empathy,
I
and
was
that's
being
how we
empathic.
succeeded. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, couple things. First is the way it works is that it has to be top down, and I think it should be considered from the top and within the organization first. And again, the more realistic you are about where you are and how far you want to go with it, the better off you are. Secondly, whether especially if you're in middle management or feeling depleted within an organization, this is where I go back to this point of understanding who you are and what you're all about. And for companies that don't have purpose, then it's very hard to feel like you're a real
Yeah.
fit, and that the company you're working for is going to return the energy that you're expending in them. If they have no purpose, you feel you do, well, make sure that your purpose is being, to some degree, satisfied within the organization. And if you're feeling depleted, maybe what you might be needing to do is just go back and trying to figure out who you are, what you're about, and what do you want to be as a person? Who do you want to
Mm.
be as a person? If that's not clear to you, there's a very big chance you're going to be disappointed.
Mm.
If you don't know where you're going, it's unlikely you're going to get there. And so my answer to the notion of getting the energy, feeling like you're good is, if you know what you're doing and what you're where you're working, you feel good about it. Well, at least you have that. And I don't think if you're in a middle manager, you're going to necessarily spark any revolution, but at least you'll feel good about yourself. You know why you're busting your butt, getting out of bed, doing the work. Maybe
Yeah.
practice some self empathy, teach that to your team, and maybe it's just a question of moving on to another company where you have a better fit in due time. Can't rush these things. Like creating trust, it takes time to do that. Empathy is something you practice and exercise throughout the day, not at all times with everybody all the time, but
Yeah.
trying to find time to listen to people and really understand them. It's something that you can learn if you want to, and and of course, you can practice empathy not just at work. You can practice empathy with the cashier at the grocers. You can
Yeah.
practice empathy with the bus driver. You can practice empathy with your wife or your spouse, because sometimes it's very simple or easy to forget to practice empathy with the ones who you're close with, whom you're closest.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. And yeah, sorry, the last question was a little bit maybe generic and unspecific, but that's what my rambling self often does when I
It's all
start
good.
thinking about all the good stuff you said. I know, I know. That's why I'm doing this. So I always have more questions than time. So here's the last, and then we left one thing out that you mentioned a bit earlier, which is this AI thing that we're also excited about and wary about and have a lot of different thinking about and play around with a lot. AI, so empathy and AI that you mentioned in the book, and there's an aspect you mentioned earlier. So explain a bit your thinking about how this works together or doesn't, or what your general thinking is with those bringing those two things together.
Right. Well, a lot of people raise their eyebrows when you start talking about AI and empathy.
I just
It's
did.
sort of like the anthropomorphization of a
Mm,
machine. And there are many parts to this, but for one, the world needs more therapists because we're out of therapists. There's not enough supply for the demand in today's world.
Mm.
So I think that the avenue of a therapeutic AI is of interest. Creating empathy in AI, we got to go back to this notion of the receiver, the emitter, and the receiver.
Yeah.
And the notion here, generally speaking, is that we're talking about the emitter being the one who is trying to be empathic. And within the two definitions of that I usually run down, one is you understand what they're thinking, feeling, and experiencing, and the other one is you feel what they're feeling. That's called affective empathy. And it's obvious that a machine won't feel what you're feeling. However,
Yeah.
it will, and oftentimes does, do better at detecting your emotions than human beings do. They have an ability to completely, well, the machine doesn't have an ego. It doesn't have distractions that we as human beings in our multitasking kind of way with pinging and a fly that passes by, our way of getting distracted impedes our ability to genuinely listen to somebody else. So a machine can, when well coded with good intentions and a proper business model, be more empathic than human beings, emit more empathy. Does the other person feel the empathy? That remains to be seen. And it will depend on the type of data that the machine has. And in order to get data about somebody, you need to instill trust. Because if I don't trust you, why am I going to give you the information that's going to help you understand me better? So it's a complicated and messy environment. The good news is there's opportunities for us as human beings to be more empathic. Don't let the machine catch us up or take us over. And B, I think that there are plenty of interesting initiatives where empathy is being used in a smart way with good ethics. And hopefully over time we'll be able to learn how to provide appropriate, safe therapy for individuals in need at all times of the day with endless ears, as opposed to us with our numbskull sort of either it's a 50-minute rendezvous with a psychologist or a psychiatrist,
Yeah.
or it's at 2 a.m. and no one's awake.
Yeah. I mean, and if there's anything, then obviously, sort of two examples come into that. One is the fact that obviously a network can remember things much better and has a much bigger brain, so to speak. We are limited in memory, but if you could, creating a collective memory is easier for a network of machines than it is for us still, because we're flawed. And talking about, when you're saying what does it take for a machine to, understand you well enough, we probably likely both know the example of was back ELISA 2.0 and Depression 2.0, where really early, very simple systems, we just faked most of it, were actually able to give us a lot of comfort because we filled in the gaps and we engaged with it in a way, and that was good enough for us, which was fascinating to see. And I'm surprised it hasn't evolved. I mean, it has evolved further, but it didn't become a bigger thing. It sort of seemingly was a thing back then. I don't know, it was 70s, 80s or something.
The
And then
60s,
sort of it,
ELISA.
even, yeah. So a long time ago. And it's now a little bit coming back, I guess. And now we're at the stage where we have articles about actually the way AI writes certain things is actually much more nicer, sounds more humane than what most organizations can fathom or can put together, which is
That all
probably a good
depends on
sign.
it depends on the coding and what you're trying to do, what your brief is about, and
Yeah, it does.
maybe we
Absolutely.
can learn from the machine. We can learn from the need to encode or the desire to encode empathy, what empathy really is. The very process of trying to encode empathy should be a tremendous learning experience for us human beings who are trying to encode it. Oh, this is what it is. This is what it
Yeah.
means. These are the actions, the
Mm.
behaviors, the words that sound empathic. Oh, that's cool. Maybe I can do that too.
Yeah, and I'm really curious about exactly that when you talk earlier about the things that stress us out and or put limitations on how we interact. We all know there's many biases that we all hold and that really, really don't help us to make decisions, to treat people differently, and do things for slightly wrong reasons instead of objective reasons, right? And I wonder how much AI, as much as obviously AI and the data in it is produced by people. So there's certain bias in some of those systems, wanted or not. But others where we can probably shape them in a way to say, you know what, leave the bias out. Let's be clear about the way we design it. That this comes middle down the road. It's just what it is. And those things don't pop up. And the machine will not have biases by nature, which is a weird word to choose in combination. But you know, you probably know what I mean. So there might be a
I
really nice
do.
opportunity to get that out of our system.
Mhm. Well, here's what I would like to conclude with is that we are at the beginning of this process of really encoding empathy in AI. We certainly don't have any tremendous examples of long-term empathy with lots of people about AI. There's sort of small examples of it.
Mm.
But as we develop it, naturally we should be attentive, sometimes cynical, check out what the intentions are, the business models, the ethical frameworks that are being used behind it, and don't shoot it down with idealistic expectations. There's so many things that I think are worthy of more time, and I often cite psychedelics. People want to shoot down psychedelics because, oh, there was this one person that did something really bad while having a
Yeah.
trip on LSD. And yet the statistics show how much better it is than far many pharmaceutical responses are. So try not to hold it to a higher standard than we generally hold ourselves. And that goes for AI and specifically empathy in AI. Don't expect it to be perfectly empathic and don't expect it to be perfectly unbiased. I mean, how human is that to eliminate all bias? How human is it to have 100% of time ability to understand everything everywhere all the time? Not going to happen. So we need to understand that we, by the way, are not perfect beings, that machines will be a reflection of that. And look yourself in the mirror. This is who we are. We are messy, we're imperfect, and don't expect either psychedelics or AI to be absolutely perfect. That's just like the way we hold our politicians to a much higher standard than we hold ourselves. And funnily enough, they never stand up to expectations. And then we get disappointed, and then we have lots of things to complain about. But that's, I think, a negative way of going about developing business.
Wonderful. Great words to finish this wonderful conversation. Thank you, Minter, so much for your time. As usual, it was really great to talk to you, and thanks for all your insights and your new book. Thanks for being with me.
My pleasure, Marcus.
You've been listening to The Wicked Podcast with co-host Marcus Kirsch and me, Troy Norcross.
Please subscribe on Podomatic, iTunes, or Spotify. You can find all relevant links in the show notes. Please tell us your thoughts in the comment section and let us know about any books for future episodes.
You can also get in touch with us directly on Twitter on @WickedandBeyond or @Troy_Norcross. Also, learn more about the Wicked Company book and the Wicked Company project at wickedcompany.com.